Hey everyone, good morning. Good morning. That's better. Thank you. For how many of you is this your first ASU+GSV summit? Raise your hand if it's yeah, we could tell, but it had to be because only the diehards would be here on Wednesday. If you walked through the lobby this morning, you could actually get a cup of coffee. So God love you that you're still here on Wednesday and you're here in our session. So we're extremely gratified you'd give us your time. I'm Paul LeBlanc. For 10 more weeks, I'm the president of Southern Hampshire University, and you don't have to cheer my departure. Some of my team is here. What the hell? Who did the woo-hoo? Jesus. I'm forgotten but not gone, as they say. And after that, I will be helping on a new project, a new company that's been created called Human Systems. And I'm joined here by some of my colleagues. The origins of Human Systems goes back to last year's ASU+GSV, when my old friend George Siemens and I were sitting outside and we were bemoaning what felt to us like a lack of appreciation for the magnitude of the change we both believe is about to wash over society, is washing over society today. And in higher education, we talked to so many of our colleagues who seem to be treating this as a productivity tool, like, oh, we'll be able to do some things more efficiently. And like, no, the world is changing. Like, if universities are knowledge factories for a knowledge economy and we are no longer the most powerful entities on the planet in terms of at least some forms of knowledge, declarative knowledge, what does that mean for us? And how do we have to rethink learning? And what is the opportunity? What is the opportunity to bring learning to so many more people who are right now not very well served by our incumbent systems? So George and I were sitting and having a cup of coffee and talking about this, and I knew at that point last year that I probably would be making this my final year and that I would be leaving and thinking about my next chapter. And I said, George, I got an idea. Why don't you leave your appointments at the University of Texas in South Australia and come join me and let's reinvent learning together? That seemed like a modest proposal. And George did the only thing one could do in that situation. He reached across the table and shook hands and said, let's do it. So that started what became our company. We're now a brave band of 7 full-time people and about 35 contractors. Some of our team is here. And we're really excited about the work. We're very early in that work. And this is not an exercise in point solutions. So we're not trying to invent one piece of the learning. It is a clean sheet of paper, full-blown system redesign. And we have been insistent that we not operate with any assumptions going in, except what the best research tells us about learning, wellness, well-being, community, soft skills, etc. So it's a fun exercise, very much influenced by the work of Clay Christensen, who was a dear friend of 40 years and was on my board and was a trustee emeritus when he passed away a couple of years ago. And what Clay would say is that if you want to reinvent the rules of the game, you can't play to the existing customers of the world. You have to find a non-consuming learner, and there are a lot of them on the planet who need post-secondary ed. So that's kind of the origin story here. I'm joined on stage by George, who is our chief scientist and architect for the work that's underway. Tanya Gamby, who heads up our wellness team, and we'll talk a little bit about wellness and well-being and how that fits in. And then my friend Rob English, who's our creative director, when he's not managing John Legend and other people almost as famous as George. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we're trying to do and how we see it. And you may leave here feeling like, I still don't understand what they're building. They didn't show anything because we don't have anything to show really. But we will bring some student voices in at towards the end. I've given Kevin my signal, which will be meow. If you hear saying meow, that is the signal to run the video. There's a longer story there. But George, let's turn to you first. You get asked to speak all the time. You speak to boards, university presidents ask you in. What is your sense of what does that conversation look like? I've kind of alluded and touched upon it, but say a little bit more about what that looks like, and what do you think they're missing in their reaction?
Well, this is known as a depression question, because by the time we're done going through the question, I think it's really a sad state of affairs in terms of how universities have responded. So I'll kind of meander a little bit and try and hit on these points of what it is that we're actually confronted or what we're up against. I think the first spot in how universities are responding, and this is from running workshops with leadership groups and online webinars with leadership organizations or leaders within university organizations, I think there's an overwhelming sense right back to January, February last year, a bit of disorientation. All of you in higher education, you know there's almost a weekly, monthly, new tool, new trend, new something that you have to respond to. You know, just yesterday I was walking through the exhibit hall and there's an absolute study to be done on take pictures of the taglines of the vendors on display, and it will very tightly match to the Google EdTech trends over the last 4 months, because that's what you see on the boards. And this time is all AI everywhere as an offering. But the university leadership, on the other hand, has responded, what I would say, in a dishearteningly slow and underwhelming kind of way. And what does that look like practically? Well, first thing, we had almost immediately a group of generative AI and assessment committees set up once ChatGPT showed up. And when you look at the reaction to it, it wasn't a reaction to, oh, this will be great, we can help our students be their very best. It was a reaction to, how do we preserve the integrity of our assessment mechanisms, right? That which benefits the system but not the student. So where there's been actions by university leadership, the action has almost always been around preserving the system as it is, not realizing and enabling the opportunities. And so when I met Paul in March, I'd been whining to people, everybody. I'm like, this feels like this is not a thing, but the most important thing for us to wrap our heads around. It feels like when you have something that maybe isn't artificial general intelligence, but can partake in our human cognitive system in a way that it can make us better, it feels like that's something. And I'd argue it's almost like, oh, let's say hypothetically, the last time new intelligence arrived on Earth was when our neocortex came online. It feels like maybe we should pay attention to this thing because that's a huge factor. So presidents didn't respond well. Universities haven't responded in a favorable way. And I think it's because they don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. They don't know what it means. And in a lot of cases, it's because they're not playing with AI. They're not embedded in the AI conversation, on a daily basis. Because if you do that, you very quickly start to realize, oh, this isn't, oh, we have a new LMS. This is something fundamentally and structurally different, primarily because it intersects into the human cognitive ecosystem. And that's where my disappointment primarily lies.
So one might argue, highly simplifying things, that a lot of what universities are about are answering the question for a student, what do I need to know to be an X? What do I need to know to be a lawyer, a nurse, fill in the blank, an accountant? Those are epistemological questions, but you've argued that the real, more fundamental, almost existential shift that we have to grapple with as an industry is a shift towards ontology. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if which is why universities should feel threatened. If the main thing that you do with your students is very doable with a growing suite of AI tools, it calls into question the value that we're adding, right? So simple illustration is I'll go back to University of Texas experience. 4 years, 450, 500-page document to get a Master of Science of Learning Analytics launched, right? It was, by the time we started to the time we're done, like people had babies and they were getting ready to go to kindergarten. I mean, that's how long it takes to launch a master's. And it wasn't necessarily industry relevant, and because things had moved since we made our initial petition and so on. And so what happened in that process was the skills that I thought students would need were quite different. Now, there were some attributes that they had to have, teamwork and related attributes. They need to be there as well. But let's just say, for example, the vast majority of what we teach in our classrooms can be ChatGPT-able. It would lead us to wonder, why are we teaching that? Why aren't we teaching the mechanisms that enable high-performing intellectual capabilities with a tool set that opens new doors that a generation ago the CIA would have killed to have access to, right? I mean, that's literally the tool set we're playing with. So I think from that lens, the ontological aspect is the who are we? What are we becoming? And a lot of this is the soft skills, the social, the emotional, the connection skills. How do you think about the future? How do you incorporate previous experience into sense-making wholes that you can communicate to others? So the curricular and pedagogical implications of AI, once the university realizes it, are enormous because it changes top to bottom, right through to assessment, what we teach and what we do in the university experience. So the ontological are those pieces that are not discrete skill knowledge-based pieces, but are part of who we are and that enable us to be successful in the world.
Thank you. Tanya, let's talk about wellness, because leading an institution as I do and thinking about our industry, wellness is, we are in a crisis mode. You'll talk about a little bit about what is the state of wellness and well-being among our learners. And yet wellness for so many institutions and campuses is almost a secondary support. It is, here's a place to go if you're not feeling well, if you're depressed or anxious. And they tend to be a little overwhelmed right now. Could you kind of talk about the challenge and then how this relates to learning?
Sure. Hello. So I'm a clinical psychologist. I come from a really different background than everybody up here, and we're in an absolute crisis, I would say, that goes beyond the wellness centers, actually. So they're overwhelmed, I think, for good reason, because the numbers are unprecedented right now. I feel like I'm really loud. Is it really loud? Okay. You know, when you look at the rates of anxiety and depression, particularly amongst young people, they're going through the roof. Loneliness, you've got 79% of 18 to 24-year-olds saying they don't have anybody to turn to, that they're lonely, that they're isolated. If you look at the impact of loneliness on longevity, on our health, it's the equivalent of smoking 15 to 20 cigarettes a day. And yet, since when did our 18 to 24-year-olds say they didn't have anyone to turn to? And they've got thousands of online friends. So we're trading these shallow relationships for what used to be deep relationships. So one of the things that I would say is this is a mental health crisis, but it's actually a crisis of living. It's a crisis of how we're all existing, what we're prioritizing, what we're doing day to day. Since 2010, since 2012, when people had smartphones in their pockets. If you look at the mental health stats for young people, the porn addiction, the gaming addiction, the social media scrolling, the quick dopamine hits that we're getting, we're trading that for wellness, for flourishing. So when I look at, you know, we're in this tidal wave change right now, as George was talking about, ontological change rather than epistemology. If we no longer need to spend as much time on declarative knowledge, right? If there's a cognitively superior agent in the room, and we're not doing so well. And you've got one of the largest training institutions in the world, which is the higher education, right? You are training thousands of students daily. We need a reboot in how we're living, in how we're connecting, in what we're prioritizing. You know, one of the things just walking around is this is new to me, this is not my world, but as I'm listening to everybody in these spaces, and I'm thinking, these are the people who hold the future of education in their hands, who hold, you know, there's a lot of students out there hopeful about what's going to come next, and a lot of what I'm hearing about as I'm walking is kind of a return on investment, you know, this ROI, what's the bottom line? I feel like we're losing the humans in that. We're losing this opportunity that comes once in a millennia to re-look at all of it. How are we living? How are we educating students? What are we preparing them for? How do we define living a life of significance? So honored to be part of this panel, honored to be thinking about it in that way. That would be my long-winded answer.
Tanya, I've heard you say before that the answer to the challenge of well-being doesn't inevitably lead to counseling or prescriptions or the treatments that we associate with our wellness centers, that are actually things we can do on the front end of learning that are really powerful and they're really within our reach. Could you just give some examples and what the research shows us about this?
Sure. So one of the things that I find interesting is when I was in graduate school, you know, years ago, one of the things that we would do when we would do studies on psych students or on intro psych students is you'd put them in a room and you'd hold them up for a week and you'd say you can't come out and you have to kind of we'd play with their circadian rhythms. It was the fastest way to get people really depressed, was isolate them, put them in their rooms, put them on screens, right? We're living like that right now. It's not 8 to 10 sessions in a counseling center. It's not coming to me as a clinical psychologist. It is the system reboot. And if you look at the research on what actually works for wellness, human connection, connection to nature, connection to these systems that we evolved with, right? If you look at the research on exercise, 3 to 4 times of cardio exercise is equivalent to psychotherapy and is equivalent to medication with none of the side effects. Meditation, mindfulness. So these practices that we evolved with are the key to flourishing and are the key to wellness. We're looking for these quick hacks. It's not quick. It's practices that are sustained over time. So I think there's opportunities here in terms of how we prioritize and the time we put into all of those practices.
Yeah, thank you. And there's not a curriculum committee I know of in the country that's talking about how do we integrate into the learning that we're building those mindfulness practices or the practices of exercise, or some may be thinking about community if they're doing experiential learning, but it's really such an edge case for what we do when we think about what learning should look like. Rob, Rob's team does amazing work. I alluded to it, and Rob's our creative director. You often argue that for this new generation of learners that are coming through the pipeline, how they learn is increasingly becoming less of a transaction. What do I want to learn and where do I want to go? And almost more of a lifestyle question. And you're helping us think about, and you'll hear from young learners in just a little bit when we show you the video, not a meow yet, that education is actually becoming, for many learners, a kind of lifestyle brand, personal brand question. Can you say more about that? Like, what do you guys work in this space all the time. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think, well, I'm definitely loud.
Whoa.
I don't even need this mic. Yeah, I think that, can I just use my voice?
No, the recording only.
Kevin, you're
It's fine, it's fine.
Turn it down.
Yeah, I think that I think that this idea of learning becoming a lifestyle, it is being adopted. I think it's being adopted by the folks who have been able to either have some level of privilege or who are the ones who easily fit within the system. They're doing it. They understand this thing, but I think for the majority of learners, they haven't really grasped this piece yet, because learning is essential throughout your life. We like to use the term learner versus the term student, because student in many ways is something that sort of has a time limit to it. It's a part of your identity that you adopt for a period of time, but a learner is something that doesn't have a time limit to it. It's something that is a part of your identity, and it's something you want to embody for your entire life. And this is a thing that we want to be able to begin to allow learners to be able to adopt as a part of their full lives, but they can't do that in many ways because of the way the system is currently designed. I like to refer to young people like Gen Z and Gen Alpha. We do a lot of work and a lot of research work, studying these groups, and I kind of refer to them as like the generation of the programmers. Like these are the first generations that were able to program basically every aspect of their lives, in opposition to how we grew up, right? So it's like for their music and their content consumption, they're able to choose Netflix and create playlists and curate versus being beholden to cable networks and television and the radio. The radio has been declining rapidly, to their shopping and personal curation experiences. Like, we were beholden to our local shopping malls or our local stores, but they're able to shop around the world. Because of the internet, which has changed everything. Everybody is more stylish than ever, and they're able to not only be beholden to their friend groups at their local high school or their communities. As Tanya said, they've got friends all around the world, through Discord and Reddit, et cetera. So you've got this group that's able to basically adjust and curate and personalize every aspect of their lives that they deem important, except for their education. So what we need to be able to begin to do is to identify how education can be sort of reshaped and reformed to be able to be personalized and individualized in that same way. And it's only then that we can begin to really, en masse, be able to have learners identified it not only as a part of their lifestyle, but a part of their personal identity.
So when you think about the work you do, and then you think about the way learning gets delivered, how it looks, what an LMS feels like, can learning be more beautiful than it is today? Is that like a question we can ask? Can learning be aesthetically beautiful?
You can tell we planned this question. Of course. I come from a world where learning isn't. It isn't accepted, it isn't cherished, and largely because it's like the learning that's delivered, it feels like no one cares. It feels like the thought that went into the creating of the experiences was lowest common denominator, we talk a lot about in our work that we do and about mattering. How can you feel that you matter when it feels like what is being delivered to you is cookie cutter? It's so I believe that learning can be developed in a way that's beautiful. I see beauty as often synonymous with simplicity. Like the simplest things can be the most beautiful, but it's not like the simplicity of it aesthetic. It's simplicity of the thinking and the thought. Like our favorite brands, our favorite product experiences. They have a simplicity that's intuitive. It's flexible. It relaxes you. It eases you into it versus it tries to send you up a mountain. That maybe you will overcome and maybe you won't. So I strongly believe that yes, the learning can feel a lot less like homework, and I think that's actually crucial in this new age. And we've through the technology that just the stuff exploding. I'm not going to use the AI word, but over the last 4 or 5 years or so, like we've got an opportunity to do that in a way that we've never really had before.
So George, Rob has evoked this notion of personalization, the ability to make learning fit and be experienced in the ways that you most want. And Monday, you and Ted Mitchell announced a new global data consortium, which I think when it goes live in 2025, if everyone who put their hand up to say we want in, would start with something like 35 million students involved. So more student data than we've ever had as a sector. How does that massive amount of data, kind of an N of all, if you could, allow us to actually get more personal? Like say a little bit about the underlying, how we're thinking about data and how you're thinking about data structures and modeling in order to produce that experience that Rob just evoked.
That's a fantastic question. I think a little bit of background, so a few colleagues I see in the room as well. We were early involved about, 14, 15 years ago when we started the Society for Learning Analytics research. And a lot of our interest at the time was, wait, students are going to school, they're generating all this data. And where I was at the time in Athabasca, we had database purges, right? Like the database got too big and it's like, well, what are we gonna do with it now? It gets purged. And so we started thinking like this could help us gain insight. Like just think for a brief moment what happens when you do a psychology study, right? We can't get into the brain of a student exactly. So we take imaging or we design studies that maybe tell us which brain regions are involved or what the cognitive output is. And then we treat that study as a proxy to get insight into what's happening in a learner's head. Data is no different, but it's actually much more sophisticated because it's really difficult to lug an MRI around while you're doing a learning task. But on the other hand, you're on your phone, you're walking, you're responding to a discussion forum, you're clicking on an interactive simulation. Each one of those actions is a reflection of something. Now, over time, what we do when we're building models is we're commenting on that something is indicative of confusion, is indicative of being distracted, is indicative of inability to focus. And so with data at the scope that we're envisioning that we'll receive, we expect we can build more sophisticated insights into students, when they learn best, what's the best help-seeking behavior, not for George, or not for people like George, but for George specifically, right? What's the best way to provide a nudging support that might not work for Tanya, but it would work for Paul? And so we're always going to look at how can we move from this surgery through machete to something that's a little more scalpel-like in the learning process. And that precision is also evident in healthcare. There's movement in that area. It's evident in a lot of sectors of society. Like Meta, for example, has pretty fine-tuned insights into what I'm going to click on when I'm scrolling. TikTok, even better, it seems like in a lot of cases. So I think what we want with the data consortium is the ability to gain enough insight to a large enough population that we can start to have confidence that the models we're using are effective and trusted proxies for the emotional, cognitive, affective, social, or metacognitive states of our learners. So that's kind of like the big goal or the big intention of where we're trying to land through the broad-scale use of data.
So let me ask you all a question. When I think of the teachers that were most transformative in my life, and I'll just say kindergarten through my senior year of college, I can name them. Mrs. Collins in high school, Dr. Heinemann, my undergraduate career. And when I think about them, the following things were true. They knew me, very much knew me as an individual, right? I felt like I mattered to them. They knew me holistically. They knew my context. They gave me their time. When I would come in to talk about a paper, they might look at me and go, hey, you seem like something's wrong. Let's talk about that instead. They could make that adjustment. They thought about my well-being, my wellness. They lifted my sights. They helped me dream bigger dreams. I can name all of them. They're not a lot. How many, hold up 1, 2 hands, use your feet if you like, how many of those transformative teachers did you have? And then I'll tell you what the average is. I see 1s, I see 5s, I see 5s, I see 2s, so 3 is the average when I ask people. I do this in all these. So you've had scores and scores of teachers in your lives. Many of them were good teachers, but only 3 on average were transformative. And what we're trying to build in human systems is a learning experience, intensely human, intensely focused, personal and beautiful, but that creates that kind of sense of mattering. We've sometimes described it as we want the field to be the best teacher you've ever had, as defined in those ways. And it might be nice now to bring some student voices in to talk a little bit about how they're thinking about their future and AI and what they hope we all will provide them in the future. So Kevin, here comes meow.
My name is Ankita.
My name's Marwan.
I go by my middle name, which is Colson. I don't know why I do. It's just I've done that since I was like 1.
I am a college student at Georgia Tech.
I live in the South.
Austin, Texas.
China.
I grew up in a missionary home. We didn't always have income coming in.
I've been homeschooled basically my entire life.
I'm going into grade 12.
I had 4 majors in a year and a half.
Took a 5-year break. Time just kind of got away from me.
When I started college, I was coming out of foster care. You essentially have no support system.
I am one of the biggest Swifties in the entire world.
I was on the bowling team.
I don't think the banjo should be legal.
I have a baby kitten who I love very much.
I love cooking.
I hate math.
I'm a curious person.
Getting to that aha moment where 2 concepts click together, that's my reward.
It's good to have like a tangible end goal.
I want to go to medical school.
Game development.
A dental hygienist.
I'm kind of having trouble, finding what I want to do.
Unfortunately, in the world we live in, you have to make the investment in education, and even if you don't derive anything from it, that darn piece of paper really speaks volumes to a lot of people.
I didn't really know how college worked.
Exams make you want to learn everything quickly, but then it doesn't really stick.
Not everybody learns the same.
Some of my teachers rush through rather than going into detail. Education is now online.
I do miss out on one-on-one interactions with my professor.
Something I struggle with is staying focused when I'm not at school.
These days you're exposed to 100 things in 10 seconds.
My free time is very limited between school and work.
I just wish I had more time.
I don't have enough time.
Well, my time management is not very good.
I'll just suck it up, take on the loans, and just worry about it later. What else can you really do?
The job market nowadays, it's just bad. Housing market is bad, inflation is high, and when things are bad, mental health usually is bad.
Mental health is one of the most important things ever.
When I'm not stable mentally, it affects my ability to complete assignments.
When I feel my mental health extremely positive,
I feel clear.
Like anything is possible.
Learning was always a difficulty until I realized that I wasn't learning in the right environment.
To me, personalized learning means being able to make mistakes and learning from my mistakes.
A learning plan that's unique to me.
That monitors your progression on a day-to-day basis and sees what you're getting, where you're not getting, and why, and addressing those things.
I like to do more hands-on work.
I like to study by myself.
I found that when I'm taking classes that are related to each other, I am a lot more engaged.
I just wish I could be in a room by myself with a teacher. We would go at my pace.
I think everyone should be a part of some kind of community because life is hard and you shouldn't have to do that alone.
I would definitely be interested in a learning AI tool.
Getting instant feedback would be really helpful.
An assistant that I can optionally use.
That is the basis of what helps people psychologically. They feel like somebody understands them. So do I feel like it can be replicated with technology? Definitely. There's people that have absolutely nobody, and that's tough. It was definitely the people and their investment in me and their belief in me that made that big of a difference. And if an AI can even touch that, I think it could help a lot of people.
So Rob's team did this amazing research for us. We did it globally. It's always remarkable to me to hear students around the globe basically echoing each other. And the things that I hear, and you may have responded to different things in here, is I need to go at a pace that works for me. I need to fit into my life. I need my mental well-being and health attended to. I want to feel like I'm with a teacher that cares for me, that makes me feel like I matter. This is what we're really trying to build. And I had the opportunity in October to spend time in Rwanda with the Prime Minister of the country and the Minister of Education to describe what we were trying to do. And we were hoping to maybe get 1,000 users and a pilot for when we go live next year in the coming year. And the Prime Minister was shaking his head, and I thought, oh, this isn't going well. Like, I thought I was doing okay here. And he said, I don't need 1,000, I need hundreds of thousands. I have whole swaths of my country that are not getting educated, that need this today. And I think as we think about what we're trying to do with this, we are not trying to compete with higher education as we know it. We're not trying to sell to higher education as we know it. We're trying to serve those learners out in the world for whom the incumbent system doesn't work very well. Because so much of what I hear them saying is not typical of most of higher education. We don't let people go at their own pace. We don't give them that kind of one-on-one time quite typically. We don't integrate learning and wellness. And I think the challenge that we opened with that George describes is that I think all of us who love higher education, I've lived my whole life in this industry, I love it dearly, but I am more and more worried about our ability to adapt to a new world with new tools and new possibilities for students who need something quite different than what we've been able to give them. I don't know that the world of learning that we've built for an industrial age makes a whole lot of sense for the world that we are emerging into. I have to say, I don't know how many of you like lose sleep over the way AI is going to play through society? I certainly do. I worry about it a lot. I can think of all the pernicious ways it could be used. But then I was thinking, wait a minute. When I think about the sort of systems that we live with, which one of them is working well for you right now? Political system working well? Healthcare system working well? Higher ed's not working well for a lot of people. Like maybe a little bit of artificial intelligence would go a long way to helping overcome the limitations of our human intelligence, which is proving itself a little bit limited for the times. So that's the wildly optimistic vision we bring to this work. What we also said is that if we're really, really good at it, and it does feel like you're working with the best teacher you've ever had, and then you never leave your darkened bedroom, we'll pull the plug on the project right away. That's not the goal. As Tanya said, the goal is how do we allow learning to be addressed well so that our learners can be connected to their community, can work on their enduring skills, can address the ontological questions of how do they want to be in the world, can develop their emotional intelligence. Because we do believe that in the future, it's the human jobs that we will be invited to do. And maybe that's a good thing. And I'll end with borrowing from Stuart Russell, the Berkeley computer science professor. If you haven't heard his Wreath lectures on the BBC, they're excellent. And he said, if we had told, in talking about our kind of information economy, our knowledge economy, if we had told our ancestors, imagine a future where you drive to this big box that we call an office building, and then you go inside and you sit in a glass box called a cubicle, and you spend all day looking at a little box called a computer screen, they would say, hell no, that's a nightmare. And one that pulls us out of nature, out of community, out of being with other people, the things that Tanya evokes. So we're trying to build a form of learning that maybe helps support that more optimistic view of what we can do when we're not living in boxes attached from each other. So thank you very much. Happy to take, I know we're not supposed to take questions, but we have 6 minutes left. So happy to take questions, and we'll violate ASU+GSV policy. Please, and I'll repeat them so Kevin doesn't have to worry about, if you want to run around with the mic if you don't mind, but I'm happy to repeat. Please.
Quick question. So as you're developing human systems, I work in K-12 space around portrait of a learner. All of new portraits are coming up with overall well-being as one of those skills or promises to kids, as well as essential life skills are popping up repeatedly. But then they go back once they're developed and they're not quite sure around community partnership. And I've been wondering, if I've been thinking about this idea of blue zone schools or blue zone communities around
Tanya, do you want to talk about this?
I think that's a great idea. You made me, the idea of blue zones, where are people flourishing and where are people doing the best? How do we learn from those places? We do know that if you look at different countries that are doing well, they tend to be we countries, they're not me countries. One of the things I would say is we're overindulging ourselves and kind of self-involved in a way that's not good for anybody. So my guess is we could guess what some of those factors are based on what the research says. But absolutely, partnering and finding those communities, I think, are where some of those keys are going to lie.
Please.
Thank you. Great presentation. I wonder, how does this look like from the system side, from the technology side? What are you envisioning? What happens with the LMS?
Well, nobody likes an LMS. I think we can all be honest. So we're not wanting to be an LMS. I think an important part is, let's just look at the prominent tools in the education sector right now. It's definitely LMS. There's some content provision from external providers and so on. But look at that experience and what it enables. Like right now, if I'm in Instructure or Canvas or Brightspace, and if I'm learning and all of a sudden I make a mistake, like I select something wrong, I post an answer that's not quite correct, the current technology infrastructure isn't available in that environment to correct me and guide me to a right answer. At best, it might flag something if I haven't logged on in a while, and after 3 days, some professor will log in and it'll give you a little red light, George hasn't logged on, you need to reach out to him. There is no question that Paul asked about data and the value of that data. We should know immediately, if Tanya hasn't logged in 3 days, no worries, this is just how she does her work, she always delivers on time. If George hasn't logged in 3 days, that's a problem. And the system should at that point have the capability, which there's not a single LMS that can do it today, have the capability to intervene in real time and say, George, this is an issue, or intervene to someone in the system to provide me with that help. So without going into a whole lot of detail, our fundamental rethinking, AI is the term we talk about broadly because it's currently hot, but it's a technology rethink and a technology redesign and a data architecture redesign that we're primarily focused on. And then when you come by, the AI is the thing that makes everything work. So a couple quick illustrations. Like one, if you look at where we started with OpenCourseWare from MIT and others, the open education movement, we learned we can scale content. Then we had open online courses, and we learned you can scale instruction. And now we have AI, and we are expecting to learn that you can scale engagement. And so, but in order to do it, that's the vision. But in order to do that, you can't build a gleaming top floor studio room on a foundation that's absolutely crumbling and chaotic. And so our vision is to do that redesign top down, starting with the technology related data layers, so that once we begin the deeper integration of AI to accelerate students' sense of meaning and value and engagement, that we have the platform to make that happen in real time rather than in these staggered, fragmented ways that we're seeing right now.
Other questions? Please.
A lot of higher ed is also built around their buildings and facilities. And although learning is ubiquitous and there's been an enormous growth in online, what do you think the impact could be on how universities rethink their physical spaces and environments?
It's interesting. We still talk about online learning or digital learning versus face-to-face and campus-based. We used to talk about digital marketing, and now it's just all marketing. We used to talk about digital media and media, now it's all media. I think it's just learning. And I think we will have to think about making our campuses and our program offerings much more flexible and fluid to allow the kind of personalization. So our systems get in our way, our ways of thinking about curriculum. At SNHU, which has 250,000 online learners and about 3,000 kids on a campus, students on a campus, they would actually have to withdraw from the campus if they wanted to finish up an online, like literally withdraw because of our crazy SIS system. So there's a lot of work under the hood, right? Getting systems, we finally got that sorted to work out. But the question about if we are going to serve people in new ways and in the ways that we think education will have to change, campuses won't be very useful as places to go to get knowledge. Now, they will be useful places to get foundational skills. Like if I'm training a nurse, if you read David Autor's piece, the MIT labor economist, on the AI and the revitalization of middle-class jobs, it's quite good. And he has an optimistic view. He thinks AI will actually bring back the middle class. But it's going to be by training people in foundational skills, making sure they have great human skills, and then giving them an AI coworker that can give them what is expensive expertise. So his example here is that we don't produce enough doctors in America. And there are huge swaths of our population that don't have access to good doctors. It takes a lot of years and a lot of money. He's saying basically, we can now train nurses who start at $130,000 a year, give them the foundational skills. They're better human skills than most of our doctors. And now the expertise that doctors used to have is at their hand. And they could actually revitalize our healthcare system. And we could hire a lot of people at $130,000 a year, which is a good middle-class starting salary. So it's an optimistic view of what's possible. Campuses will still be places where people need to get their hands on the work, if you will. Yeah. But, I hear from my colleagues sometimes worry that we will be disrupted by, a new institution or a new university, et cetera, et cetera. We're very competitive with each other as an industry, as you know. Usually it's not your usual competitors that put you out of business. It's the entry that came out of the blue that you never expected, you never saw coming. That's who disrupts industries. So I wouldn't look for what university will get this right. I would look for who's getting it right outside of the current ecosystem. Yeah. And with that happy note, I think we are at the end of our time, Kevin. Yes, thank you very much, everyone, for making time for us.